not hear me in the back? Is that better? Okay, so basically right up. Apologies to anyone using the mic after me. Again, I am Julie Timm. I am the CEO of Sound Transit. I wanted to say thank you so much for your attendance here tonight, but also for many of you who attended a few weeks ago when I was at City Council. I very much appreciated the opportunity to listen. The team appreciated the passion and your dedication to this project, to your community, to the project. We're here to listen to you some more. We understand that there is still a lot to work through. We're not going to come to answers tonight. And there are going to probably be some things that we're going to say tonight as we work through it that you might not like or agree with. And we're still committed to continuing the conversation. We're committed to continue to work with you and to trying to find a way to make this a better project for everyone. That is a commitment that I hold firm to. And I'll tell you that the board does also want to see what is in the best interest of the region, the community, our riders. Sometimes it's a very hard challenge to balance the needs of so many people. I will say that we do have one of my board members is here tonight. I'm going to ask him to stand up, if I may. Board member Baker has taken the time out of his night to also attend tonight so that he can hear what you're going to be saying and what we're going to be saying, and he can take that back and represent the board in his own way to them. Wanted to appreciate his attendance here tonight. So thank you, Board Member Baker. I also want to say thank you to the City Council members and president that are here today. Tom French, Council President, Lori Bodie, Philippa Cassover, Larry Golden, Summer Riddle are all here tonight. I want to say thank you to all of you also for continuing to support your community as they are giving us their thoughts and their voices and as we're listening. So thank you also for your commitment to your community. I'm going to stop talking in just a second. We do have a facilitator here, and there's so many people here. I'm going to ask, you don't have to, but I'm going to ask for just a second if you would indulge me. If you think that you would like to, or that you already know that you're planning on speaking, do you mind raising your hands? That's okay. The reason why I'm asking is that if everyone here wanted to come to the mic and speak, we're going to be challenged to hear everyone. So we're trying to figure out how much time to ask you to limit yourself to, so that we can make sure as many people have a chance to be heard as possible. So we're going to think about it as a minute. We might be able to allow more than that. What we're asking is that if you can help us to stick to some of that. We're not trying to limit you. We're trying to make sure we hear from everyone. And so to be respectful to your neighbors, so we all agree with that in advance. There's going to be a few other things that we're going to try and have consensus around before we start. Again, so we can hear from as many as possible and so that we can respect each other's position. With that, I want to say thank you so much. This is not the last conversation we will have. We will keep talking. But with that, let's get to the order of business today.
Thanks, Julie. Can everyone hear me in the back there? Thanks. I would echo Julie's welcome. My name is Ryan North. I work with Enviro Issues, and I'll be moderating tonight's event for the Sound Transit Stride BRT project here in Lake Forest Park. Our goal tonight, just again, as Julie said, is to share information in response to feedback that Sound Transit has heard from the Lake Forest Park community, and to create a better understanding and further dialogue on those key issues. So tonight we'll have speaking, you've already met Julie. Wanted to quickly introduce Bernard Van Kamp, who is the project director, Rick Kapka, who's the deputy program executive, and Leslie Mauer, who is the environmental lead. So they'll be both presenting and responding to questions that we get tonight. We've got additional staff leads and subject matter experts who we can call upon to help address your questions as well. So my role tonight is to ensure that as many people as possible who want to speak can, and that we get an opportunity to get those questions out, and also that we have an environment where everyone feels like they are comfortable speaking. So I'm just going to take a couple of moments to share around Q&A and how we'll proceed after the presentation. The presentation will be about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll move right in. So I'm going to try to keep us focused on questions and ask you to be concise and maybe start with your question and provide some context to that. I'm also going to ask Sound Transit to be concise in their responses with that goal of getting as many people to the mic as possible. There was, I believe, a list of community questions that came in. Thank you for those in advance, and those are going to be addressed in the presentation where possible, and potentially in follow-up if more is needed. We will also be documenting this event tonight and have that summary available to you all within 30 days. Commitment from Sound Transit. Now, if there are questions that we can't get to tonight, we have comment cards that you can write down, submit, and get those into the queue so that they can get reported out in that summary. So we can go over more around the logistics of Q&A when we get to that point. But again, my ask is that we do everything that we can to support each other in keeping the dialogue going, having respect for different points of view. And with that, I think we're ready to get into our presentation. So Bernard, you're welcome to come to this mic or use that one. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Good evening. Bernard Vandekamp. I'm the program executive with the Bus Rapid Transit program.
Can't hear you.
All right. I will see if I can get this a little better. How's that? Everybody okay? All right. And I'll try not to yell at you this evening. I do have a brief presentation. I wanted to provide some context of what we are trying to do with the Bus Rapid Transit project. And then we've wanted to respond to a lot of the questions that we've been hearing from the community. So I'm going to keep this pretty brief because we're really here to hear what you all have to say this evening. Can you see the screen okay, or did we play with the lights a little bit? We'll continue. All right. Right, go ahead to the next slide. Most of this will pick up just from verbal anyway, so. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead to the next slide and one more to get into what Bus Rapid Transit really is about. All right, now we're synchronized here. So Bus Rapid Transit, it is part of the SP3 plan. Several years ago in 2016, there was a voter passed initiative to expand light rail and commuter rail and bus rapid transit throughout the region. So Lake Forest Park and along the 522 corridor, the investment is to do bus rapid transit. What that is it is going to be buses. It will be battery electric, so all electric articulated coaches. The long ones you see out there today on the corridor, except electrical power. We're going to be running every 10 minutes. The intent here is to match that level of service, the frequency that light rail provides, so they don't have to worry about when's the next bus coming or making a lot of planning around the frequency there. Our stations are going to be similar in quality to light rail, so we're trying to have good passenger information, coverage during weather, and also make roadway improvements. You'll hear a lot about bat lanes. Those are business access and transit, similar to what you see out in the eastern part of Lake Forest Park now and out in Kenmore and Waffle. The intent of those is to provide speed and reliability. We're not going to be racing down the corridor a lot faster than the speed limit. We will be at the speed limit or below, but we do want to ensure that we can be reliable, and that is why we are making these investments in bat lanes, is to ensure that when the traffic gets bad, we can still get past it and provide a reliable trip. I'll go on to the next slide, please. So to give you a sense of the timeline, and this is where we start getting into some of the questions about where it's been, why have you been speaking to us, but I want to provide the context again that the 2016 voter-approved plan earnest in 2018 and have tried to engage the community along the way. We don't always reach everybody, but we have made an earnest effort to reach out. That was complicated during the pandemic, and I tried to show online. Do a sound check here real quick. All right, now we can listen. Where we have been with the project is there have been a number of changes to try and respond to what we've heard from the community early on. You'll hear tonight about the west shift, bat lanes, some of the aesthetic concerns, and tree canopy and so forth. So we'll get into that in a moment, and I do want to keep this at a quick clip. So I'll just let you know in the general progress of the project. We have completed our environmental review. We are in final design, and as many of you are likely aware, we are in the property acquisition phase now, so we're talking with a number of folks about portions of property that are required for the project. We are, as I said, deep into design. We're at about 90% design right now, and we're about 90% completion and preparing for permitting. We are anticipating beginning construction in either late 24 or the 2025 timeframe, and have about 2 years of construction, 2 years or less of construction to get it all done. So on the next slide, please. So to get at some of the questions that we have heard along the way, sorry if I'm missing the mic here a bit. One of the central questions we've heard is why a bat lane, why not do queue jumps? We have heard questions about, or comments to the effect that queue jumps would do the job, that we did not take a close enough look at queue jumps, and that the travel time benefits that we're seeing through the Lake Forest Park area are about 2 minutes. So that is correct, that it will on average be about a 2-minute savings from the new bat lane that is proposed. As you're all aware, there's a lot of variability of the traffic conditions, so at times that will be far more than 2 minutes, and other times it will be negligible relative to general purpose traffic in the adjacent lanes. But I do want to come back to the theme here, which is speed and reliability. When Sound Transit comes out and builds a project, whether it be light rail or bus rapid transit, the intent is to do it once and to have that long-lasting, 75 to 100-year time span. So be forward-thinking, because these are very large and can be disruptive investments. So that is part of the rationale behind going forward with a bat lane rather than queue jumps. Is that, as I mentioned earlier, that was the original plan, and it is intended to complete the system that was started many years ago in Bothell and Kenmore, and of course, Lake Forest Park to the east. We do want to make this investment and be done, so we're not coming back periodically to add a little bit more, a little bit more. So our intent is to go forward, and what we are doing with our final design is to have a continuous bat lane from 145th out to Bothell. I'll go on to the next slide, which is the station slide. We have been hearing concerns about the size of the station, that there'll be industrial scale, well, how we're sizing these bus stops and the stations that go along with them. I wish now that I brought a graphic of them, but the stations will be fairly similar to what you see in terms of architecture for light rail stations. But in terms of size, we are sizing these to accommodate 2 buses simultaneously. So they'll be about 140 to 150 feet long. We can get into the specifics later if need be. But to give you a sense of scale, a typical light rail station is about 400 plus feet long. So it's quite a bit smaller than those. The rationale, again, is we will have multiple bus routes traveling the 522 corridor simultaneously. We don't want to have buses bunching up, waiting for their turn at the station. We want to try and keep things moving and provide that high level of service to our passengers. So by having room for 2 buses, we can have passengers boarding and deboarding simultaneously and not bunching up behind the station waiting their turn. We do know that King County Metro is proposing to do a lot of service cuts in this corridor in the near term. We have been confirmation from King County they have every intention of restoring that service in the future and expanding it as we go forward. It is a growing corridor and the transit demand will be there. Go on to the next slide, please. Trees. I do appreciate Lake Forest Park. There's a very thick tree canopy here, and that it's in the name itself. Where we are in the project is that, what we have heard is that various comments to the effect that the tree count has been changing because we've been recounting them or looking at them differently. That we will not be replacing the trees and so forth. So what I do want to say is that as we've been going through design, we've had a number of these meetings dating back to last fall, and prior to that, a lot of input, so we do appreciate the community's values. We have been going through and looking very closely at how we can tighten up the corridor without compromising safety or the functionality that we need by the investments that we're making. So we have been able to reduce the tree impacts significantly. They were just shy of about 500 trees that would need to be removed. That is now down at about 390. Again, we can get into this in more detail, but there certainly is an effect. I'm not going to stand in front of you tonight and say that the corridor will not change. It will. There will be impacts due to the street widening, to put in that lane, to have sidewalks and build other features of the project. So we are trying to reduce the impact, but we will have a physical impact. I'll go on to the next slide now, please, which is the west shift and the retaining wall. We have heard there was no public outreach, that certain groups were favored, and there was a question about whether this was covered in our environmental review. You see SEPA up there, that's the Environmental Policy Act of the state. So where we are is, I will assure you that the west shift was not due to any particular lobbying by a neighborhood group. What happened there was we were going through, and as you know, there is a westbound or a southbound bat lane now. There is not one on the other side of the street. We started out thinking, let's just leave the rest of the street alone and add it to the east side. As we got out and started talking to property owners and getting out on the ground to make observations, it became clear very quickly that we were going to have some significant impacts on people's homes. When we do our project development, our mantra is to avoid impacts first. If we can't avoid them, then to minimize them. And if we can't avoid all impacts, then we mitigate them. The driver behind moving to the west was to avoid displacing people, or that's a pleasant way of saying having to buy out their homes and move them somewhere else. So what we did during project development was to shift the alignment, so we need to push into the hillside. It does affect a lot more properties. The count of properties is much greater, but we do not anticipate having to displace anyone from their homes as a consequence. So it's a trade-off, but one where we were trying to minimize the impact to the extent we could. In either case, the topography out there is quite steep. We would have been building quite large walls in either case, whether it be on the east side of the corridor or the west. But where we are is we have analyzed this in our environmental documentation, and we are moving forward with the west shift because it does avoid having those impacts. Again, so the shift is part of our final design that we're proceeding with, and we have been trying to work with the State Department of Transportation and the city to make sure that we get things right. A lot of modifications were made along the way to try and tighten up the corridor. For example, just having a sidewalk on one side rather than both. I'll move on again to keep this a fairly high clip. Next slide is the environmental review process. We have heard about, we did not do an EIS. Again, the west shift was not considered our environmental. I already covered that. The type of environmental review that we did is called the SEPA checklist. What we tried to do early on was to meet with all of the cities involved and the state and King County Metro and reach out to the community, to try and find out where we stood in terms of is there a common direction going forward. I mentioned earlier that the definition of the project when it went out to voters, and I'm sure that no one here read every last line of that voter pamphlet or the materials that were referenced. But we did work with the cities along the corridor, including Lake Forest Park, and understood that we should complete the bat lane network, including going through with the additional bat lane through Lake Forest Park as proposed. Our environmental checklist, as a consequence, looked at it as a planned action rather than looking at multiple alternatives. And that is a legitimate way of doing business. We did an exhaustive environmental review that I think is well over 2,000 pages of documentation, and that's not because it's large type, it is quite detailed, and that is available to everybody in this room. So we proceeded with that shift, completed our environmental, and did go forward with that for a decision from our board on proceeding with the project about 2 years ago. Noise analysis. You want to cover that? We have heard comments to the effect that we did not do an adequate, or we did not look at noise, analyze it adequately, and that various comments about the impacts of removing trees has that been adequately considered in our noise analysis. So we did perform a noise analysis. It was based on a transit. There's different ways of doing noise analyses. I'm not going to get into that level of detail tonight, but I do want to assure you that we are proposing a transit project, so we have followed the required and recommended methods of studying noise for a transit project. And we have found that while there are high levels of noise out there today, this will not add to that. There may be a 1 decibel increase, which is essentially imperceptible. I'm hearing you that there are noise, it's an agitation that exists out there today. We are not having a significant impact to the existing noise, and therefore there's no mitigation that is proposed. I'll go on to the next slide here. We'll talk about some of the design changes that we have done to reduce impacts, and describe some of these before at a pretty high level. But as we've been proceeding with design, we do have a number of different jurisdictions that we need to satisfy. I don't want to get into a lot of bureaucratic discussion here tonight, but it is a state highway. We need to meet WSDOT standards for a state highway to ensure that it's safe. We also have city requirements that we want to satisfy. That includes things like the landscaping, sidewalks. We want to make sure it's a safe facility that meets the local context. As we've been going through, I did mention we shifted to the west. We eliminated the sidewalk on the east side, the west side, excuse me. But we are moving forward with the sidewalk on the east side for safety considerations. There have been some refinements as well to ensure that we're meeting lighting standards in the city. I've recently heard some new requests for additional lighting, and certainly need to talk to the city about that. As we've been proceeding since 60% design was circulated in the community last fall and winter, we are at a 90% level now, as I mentioned. We have gone through and tried to tighten up, and Rick is very close to the design and can speak to it in detail, but what we have been able to do is reduce some of the tree impacts. I also want to share that we have been working with the city and understand the fascia and design of the retaining wall. There are preferences that we've heard from the city that we have incorporated into the project. The pattern, for example. There's also a desire to have some landscaping grow up onto the wall to cover and provide some relief. We are incorporating what are called landscape pockets. These are a fairly new design technique that were used on the 520 corridor in the points communities. It's essentially creating a hole in the wall that does not compromise the integrity of the wall, but it allows for planting of vines to be able to grow up the wall rather than trying to coax them down the wall and creating drainage problems up at the top. So I'm already diving into too much detail, but I did want to let you know that what we change in the corridor, a lot more hardscape, which is currently has vegetation on it. There's no denying that it is going to change, but we have heard from the city a preference on how we can make that wall a bit more unique to the community, incorporate some of those ability to grow vines over it to provide some relief. We've also heard from some of the neighborhood groups that preserving some of the historic signs that are out there is a priority. That is something that we can do. But I'll say overall, our intent is to bring down the impacts on the landscape to the degree we can. We cannot eliminate those impacts, but we have been able to reduce them quite a bit over the last 6 months or so working on this. I'll stop there. I think we do want to allow as much time as we can. I've been talking too long here, so Ryan, I think we'll turn it back over to you. And thank you for listening to my presentation.
Can we get the lights back up from the front? Thank you. Thank you, Bernard. We're ready to move into the Q&A portion here. I wanted to add a few more remarks to how we'll work this. We've got a couple of wireless mics here, and these folks are going to be helping. We'll be taking hands in the room and trying to move around and get to everyone if possible. So moving from front to back, left to right. And so they'll hold the mic for you and invite you out to the aisle. You can make way for folks when it's their turn to ask a question. We appreciate it. Based on the show of hands that we saw, I think we should aim for 1 to 2 minutes per question. We also have a response part of that. So just doing the math here, trying to get as many questions as possible. I will help keep time and provide reminders. If you could start with your question, add some context, and if you have a follow-up based on the response that you hear, we'll allow that. That would be great. I think that will encourage some exchange and dialogue. But if you've got a second separate question, I'd like to move on to another voice in the room. Do you have to have a question? Like if you have a comment. We're trying to focus on questions and dialogue, so I'd like to make as much room for questions as possible. And if you have comments, and as we have time. So with that, I think that we'll go ahead and move on here. We're going to work until the end of the meeting with Q&A. And starting out, first want to recognize we have a few council members or any council members who'd like to speak. We just ask that you also keep your questions and comments in the time. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Hi everybody, I'm Lori Bodie. I'm a council member. I have been to every single Sound Transit public engagement meeting, going back to all the virtual ones and the ones that have been held here recently. I also used to manage large infrastructure projects, specifically transmission lines, so I ran public engagement and environmental review processes. So I speak with a background of information, and I know what I'm talking about. Several months ago, our council unanimously requested that Sound Transit pause the project design work in LFP, which then was only at the draft 60% stage, to hear our citizens' concerns and work directly with our city and community. And our objective then was to avoid a meeting like this, was to make sure we had improved design refinements With bus ridership down, the BRT is scheduled for 2028 completion, and the Sound Transit LFP Town Center parking garage postponed until 2044. Making meaningful design changes to the BRT for our city is a matter of equity. LFP is the smallest, most heavily impacted community for the whole core city project. It directly affects over 75 residences, removes 2/3 of the trees, and has 2/3 of the project cost. And there are other impacts in our city, but I won't go into those in the interest of time. The impacts are coming at what cost benefit? The improvement from widening this 1.2-mile segment is admittedly a mere 2.3 minutes at peak hours. And from studying this issue and reviewing all the documents, I think this is an improvement that could largely be achieved. Hold on a second. Sorry, everyone. I apologize. We could have a few northbound queue jumps and signal light changes and come probably pretty close to the same benefits. And by way of example, the queue jump improvements that are over 1.3 miles on 145th would provide 10 minutes of time savings. In the interest of good government and partnership, Sound Transit should pause and objectively study this option for the most part. If the queue jump with signal light changes looks roughly comparable, the savings would be substantial for Sound Transit. We would accomplish transit benefits, but save money and impacts. Hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars in direct costs, and because of the extensiveness of the construction, many economic indirect costs from the long construction timetable. There is a win-win here for both regional transit goals and the people of LFP. Our community and council members have consistently and very civilly advocated smart, effective BRT actions and design changes that would reflect the voter levy. I don't believe we're doing anything against the voter levy, and retain transit benefits. But at the same time, result in environmentally sound alternative designs that are less costly and less massive. And so some of the topics that have been discussed today, which I won't get into, are the smaller bus stop design, the scaled down retaining wall, preservation mitigation, which were trees and public safety improvements. So Sound Transit representatives, please pause and make these changes before proceeding further. In so doing, you'll be showing regional leadership, demonstrating responsive government, achieving substantial cost savings, and conserving sensitive environmental lands and streams. And if you do so, LFP will owe a heartfelt thank you to CEO Timm for finally engaging with LFP, for meaningful consideration of our comments, and for leadership and at long last positively addressing the real concerns of the LFP community.
Thank you. Hi, so we're actually going to be taking questions in the audience. We've got mics. We're going to be running. Yeah, so go ahead. Yep.
Why don't you let them go ahead? Why don't you let them go ahead?
Go for it. Go for it. Just want to make it clear that we've got mics. We'll bring it to you.
My name is Aria. I'm 11 years old, and I think this wall is completely unnecessary. In building it, you will be killing a staggering amount of trees, no doubt home to various creatures. To add to that, this could have huge impacts on this town. We all see the morbidly graffitied walls on the sides of highways, and that is exactly what would be the result of this wall going up. Along with that, This wall, in our community's views, is completely negative and useless. What are your valid reasons for why you absolutely need to build this wall?
I want to say thank you for that question. I have 2 kids. One's in middle school, one's in high school. I think a lot about the environment. Personally, it's one of the reasons I work at Sound Transit. Sound Transit is creating a better environment for our community here in the future. So I did want to share that. In terms of the question about why are we building these walls, it's a matter of structural need. We are adding a lane. In order to add that lane, we need to widen the road, and these walls are going to hold up the additional width that we need and provide containment for the road. So just a quick answer in terms of why we need those walls. In order to build that extra lane, we've got to construct these walls.
All right, Charlie, you want to get to a question on this side, and then we'll move on to this side.
Can you respond to comments? You're going to respond to each person. Can you respond to that?
I figured it out. Mr. Julie is here. So if I could, just very well, so thank you for waiting. I guess there was a couple of, there was a whole series of comments in it. I don't remember all of them. I will say the one that I will respond to specifically is when I did come out to speak to council, I did acknowledge that Lake Forest Park City Council is due a letter. It has been delegated to me. It is on my desk to do, and I did not want to move before I came to this meeting tonight. I've already talked to staff to make sure that we can write that, and it will be coming back. But to be fair, when I came to City Council, it was to here, and now we're at a top, and that will go into the letter.
Hello, this might, Sound Transit, this might be a naive question, but when you do cut down trees, do you take into account the springtime when there's nests and rainforests and try to avoid springtime in cutting down trees?
So I will say we have a 2-year construction window that Bernard talked about. We do take into account the time of year when certain activities can be done. So when it's really wet and rainy out there, if we are doing activities that are disturbing the ground, there's additional environmental protections that we can put in place to make sure we don't impact the environment beyond construction. We do have some of our subject matter experts over here. I don't know if anyone wants to take a step.
Hello, my name is Kathy Fett. I'm an environmental planner at Sound Transit. To answer that question, yes, there are several laws that require us to take a look at nesting season, and we will be evaluating nesting of at least migratory birds to understand where those types of things could be occurring and avoid them. So yes, that is required, and we will be doing that.
Thank you. I just hope all birds will be considered and forest creatures.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So the question will be on this side.
This is addressed to each member of the staff of Sound Transit. Do you own a home? I won't expect you to answer because I know by statistical analysis you do own homes. And what would it be like if somebody came to your home and cut away 4 to 8 feet of your front yard? I think you'd be surprised and shocked and dismayed. Or maybe you get lucky and they cut away 4 to 8 feet of your backyard. Can you respond?
Yes, sir. I do own a home in Virginia. I do not own a home here. I haven't been here long enough, and the housing market's brutal. I do hope that I will be here long enough that I will be a permanent resident and I will buy a home. I've worked in the transportation industry now for coming close to 30 years. Worked on roadway projects, bus projects, rail projects. When we're making the transportation investment in the community, this is a hard answer. This is one of those ones that's very hard. We always have to look at how to minimize impacts, but when you go through communities to connect them, there's almost always going to be a sacrifice, and someone is going to have to pay that bill. And that means that some people will have parts of their front yard taken or trees taken in order to advance these generational investments that will connect our community and make our community in the region greener. I'm not saying that to say that I don't understand or feel the pain. It is one of the worst and hardest parts of this job. And everyone up here feels it very, very specifically that they take pains to reduce as much as we can and yet still serve the regional purpose of the connectivity of these projects, a BRT project in this case. I hear you, and I'm so sorry that these projects will have those impacts. We are going to avoid and minimize as much as we can, and yet there will be impacts. And I hear you. I hear you.
Thank you. We've got Charlie on the side to the next question.
Okay, two things. One, the first one is in response to when you mentioned you're working on a letter, you're proposing a letter in response to the Lake Forest Park City Council. I believe Councilmember Bodie said that the council sent you that letter several months ago. And so if you're just responding now, it'll be nice to know why it's taken this long. And also the city council represents all of us. So it's really a letter from all of us. So that's the first part. The second one is this back lane. That seems to be one of the biggest intentions here in Lake Forest Park. So if you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe from the corner of 145th and Lake City Way over to the freeway, so all along 145th, they're going to have these the design is to use those cut things, not put in a back lane there. Is that correct? You jump, sorry.
So I can answer the first question about the letter.
Okay.
And it's not a good answer. I'm going to tell you that up front. The letter came. It came in and we looked at it. We started to prepare a response, and I take full responsibility that it did not get responded to sooner. It was then delegated to me, and I knew I was going to come to speak to Lake Forest Park, and I did not want to check that box and send a letter without coming in person and listening. I also did not want to come immediately after council and respond when we hadn't had a chance to have that conversation. It is absolutely my intent to respond. I'm taking full responsibility and accountability, and it will happen. The same way we're doing this meeting here today is because I made that commitment to City Council, and we will keep moving forward. Now, regarding the queue jumps, I'll have to talk to my team to answer that one.
The other project, as it's moving forward, does have the bat lanes on 522 from 145th out to the east. On 145th itself, we are building queue jumps at some of the intersections, such as at 15th. We're also working with WashDOT and the City of Shoreline to build a roundabout at 5th, and quite a bit of widening from 5th back to the east. So we're creating a short bat lane there or an extended queue jump. So the amount of changes on 145th, they are less. There are still quite a bit of impacts to businesses and residences along there doing the widening for the queue jumps and for the stations.
So given that, then I'm wondering why are the queue jumps okay on 145th, but not through Lake Forest Park?
If I could build a BRT system that was truly have good speed and reliability for its entire length, we would be doing more on 145th. It is a very tight corridor. The sidewalks are very narrow, and the houses and apartment buildings and the businesses are right up next to it. We had a definition going into the beginning of this project that laid out these assumptions that we have to move forward with.
It is a hard conversation. Why do they get queue jumps and you don't? The first time I walked and drove through the corridor with my team. I asked them the same question. Why don't we have bat lanes here? I didn't ask them why we don't have queue jumps. A BRT system, high capacity transit, which we are mandated to provide, is the bat lanes on the queue jumps. When you put queue jumps in, that's rapid ride. So the question is not why aren't you getting queue jumps? The question is why didn't we put bat lanes there? And Bernard started to answer the question in his presentation where he talked about that our mandate is to try and minimize wherever we can the amount of property that we displace, the businesses we replace. If you go along that corridor, what you'll see is block after block of apartment buildings and homes and businesses that if bat lanes were put through there, would be complete takes. And we don't like to use that word take, it's a jargon, but there would be a very large number of displacements of people losing their homes, losing their businesses along that corridor. There's just not enough right of way to prevent a very large number of impacts. So the question is less about why are we doing bat lanes here, it's more about why can't we do bat lanes there, which is really what we should be doing. If I may, I understand when we started this conversation, part of the ground rules, or the sharing, was that you were not going to like everything I had to say. Fair? Fair. And we would fairly listen, and we would honestly answer.
My question is, what if a lot of the assumptions you're making are wrong? And I'm going to start with the one that you made, that taking 5 or 6 homes was less of an impact than impacting 110 and 500 trees and not telling the impacted residents. How do you assess that your choice was correct? My next question is, how can you project 75 to 100 years in the future when AI is coming, when remote work is coming, when more people are going to be traveling in other ways than a static bus system, which is linear? How can you assume that the way you're projecting the future is even close to what it'll be 50, 75, or 100 years from now? And in the meantime, you're destroying this community, and knowingly so.
How can we project the future? And if you go back and you look at a lot of visionaries, nobody projected the car. A lot of people had horses, horse and buggies. You go back to pictures in New York, and that's the way it was. And literally within a few years, cars took over the city. So it's a valid question. How do we know what the future holds with transportation technology when things are changing at such a fast pace? That is true. We have to go based on what we know today and what we can reasonably project for the future, and how we can try to do the best that we can to create a more ethical and sustainable transportation corridor based on what we know today and what our industry and the innovation industry tells us is likely. Now there are things such as AI that are coming. The question then becomes, can we automate the corridor? Can we do other ways to go through it? Are there other ways to connect people? Will there be more autonomous vehicles? Will there be less drivers on the vehicles? Will we be flying in the air? I can't answer those. There's no answer for those today. What we need to do, though, is we need to keep moving forward to connections, because we know in the next 10 years and 20 years, the region will continue to grow. These corridors will get more congested, and people do need more ways to connect. And so therefore, voters are looking across the region about how to connect a transportation mobility network for everyone that will help people through these very constrained, very developed, and very loved corridors. I think I missed part of the question, but that was part of it.
Okay, before we move on to the next question, I'm seeing lots of hands up, more than when we started. I wanted to ask that, I'm hearing some boos, I'm hearing some yays, if we could keep that down. If there are other ways that you can show support, raise your hand, but we want to make as much space as possible for the exchange, and so we just ask that you limit that. Charlie, let's move on to this side.
I have both a comment and a question. So the comment is, I'm going to say I'm speaking for myself. There may be other people in the room that feel this way too. I'm sensing a very clear power imbalance in this event tonight. I'm wondering about, I think that it's one thing to say to people, hear you. It's very, very different to truly enter into a dialogue about the options. This is, I was at the city council meeting, and again, I want to ask about Lori Bodie's point about the pause. It's simply, it's not an excuse to be able to say, we didn't answer, and we will eventually, but we're at 90% now. And I'm all for the Seattle nice, I've been here 40 years, but I don't feel that this is being addressed in a really direct way tonight, and that's what I'm hoping to hear.
Thank you. This is another, I apologize, I didn't answer the question quite the way I heard it. I think that the question was whether I wrote the letter, and the question that I'm hearing now is not about whether or not we responded, but whether or not we're going to pause the project. Is that a fair? I want to make sure I'm hearing what you're asking. What you're asking is, why don't we pause the project?
Yeah.
So, with that, if I may. Is that not what you're asking? I'm sorry, please clarify.
Clarifying is that it's not for me to get a pause. It's going back to when that request was made, and now you're saying, well, I'm sorry we didn't respond, I take responsibility. It's too late. To me, that's, as a citizen, as a taxpayer, that is entirely unacceptable. And I want
Do you want to finish up, please?
No, I think you get my drift.
So, the letter is a different issue. The board did see the letter. We did discuss the project, and the board was very specific that they chose to continue the project as we move forward. And staff is moving forward with the project as the board approved it. That is I don't know how else to answer other than the board decided to approve it. They're the decision-making body, and that's what they're doing. I'm sorry. Sorry. Actually, at this point, he's here to listen, and I think to be able to understand what's going on, at this point, I don't want to put him on the spot. He's here as a courtesy to hear and then be able to respond back from here. The answer is going to be the same. The board did consider, they're looking at multi-generational, multi-billion-dollar projects across the region, and the direction is to move forward and put these in place, to consider where we can minimize and mitigate, to do the best that we can, but our mission is to create and to develop and put in place high-capacity transit projects. BRT, in order to be functional, requires a significant number of bat lanes. The more you reduce that, or you change that, the more you degrade it from BRT into rapid ride buses, which is not the mandate of the voters, and I know this is hard to hear. There are lots of hands going up, a lot of comments. Again, going back to what we started with, I know I'm not going to be popular here tonight, but we talked about there are some very hard facts of this, and I promise to be honest.
Okay, sorry. My name is Jeff Snedden, and I'm a co-founder of CORE. I'd like to ask how many people here came because you got a flyer from us or an email. Okay. So I want to be really clear. What we're talking about here is the highly successful decision on 145th Street. And Bernard, it's one Q-Pass lane on 15th. I've read looked at the roll plots. And that one transit Q-Pass and signalized light on 15th Avenue accounts for 62% of all of the time saved for the bus to transit from the South Shoreline Station all the way to Bothell. So I look at that and I think that's a pretty good deal. So we then looked at, based on data that you gave us, what happens if the bus in Lake Forest Park travels slower at the same rate that it's traveling on 145th, and it would add an additional 50 seconds. I also asked the question, how did you arrive at you've got a mean, right? You said 2.3 minutes. You have a max as much as 10. What's the science around that? And the answer is there isn't any science around it. I asked, did you ever study at any point in time, as far back as 2015, an alternative to a dedicated bus lane in Lake Forest Park? I haven't got an answer on that, but I'm pretty sure the answer is no. So I'm really struggling here with the notion that we absolutely have to have a bat lane here. When another piece of information you gave us was that 55% of the cost of construction management, and property acquisition and permitting, 55% of the cost of the entire project is here in LFP. When you could be doing an alternative design that would have far less disastrous impacts to our city. I don't understand this. Can you possibly explain why you never studied an alternative and why you're not open to studying this alternative of a Q-Pass lane here?
So the question, as I understand it, is why are we not looking at Q bypass lanes in Lake Forest Park? Is that right?
Why didn't you study it and compare the decision to make a bat lane that runs the entire duration of our city, and it's really only in one direction because there's already a bat lane on the other side. Why didn't you look at some point in time, as far back as 2015, at an alternative that's being applied so successfully with such great results on 145th Street? It's just an absolute decision. We're going to build a bat lane, and that's that. And I'm not hearing anything from Sound Transit that says, here's the reason why we need to do that and why that idea isn't sufficient for us.
Well, I cannot vouch for the statistics that you just laid out about the travel time savings and the cost. Those do not sound familiar to me. I know that you've received a lot of information and analyzed.
I actually have this from public records requests. I know the exact document and the page numbers. These are your data, not ours.
Just to clarify, and I appreciate your position. There are, again, thousands of pages of analysis. These are subject matter experts, and they do know what they're talking about. However, they probably can't recall every single part of every single document on the spur of the moment. So we can go back and look at that and get some more information to you. We do have general answers, but if you want specifics and detail of that data, you're going to have to miss a little bit of grace to come back to go into that and pull that information out, so we're replying accurately. And I know that this, again, we're here to listen and talk. But when you start going into the details, the finite details of the project right now, we will need to sit down with you and look at that so we can respond fairly on that. With that said, I hear you, we're going to keep talking about it.
I keep hearing the word mandate from you, that you have a mandate to do bad things. And I want you to know that we, the citizens of Lake Forest Park, have a mandate to preserve our forest canopy. Our community is one of the earliest ones in the Puget Sound area. We had existed long before Sound Transit ever existed. I, as a homeowner who tried to cut down a tree in my backyard 3 years ago, met with much red tape at City Hall. I had to have 2 arborists come out for 1 tree, pay money for permits and 2 arborists, and finally I was granted permission to cut down the tree. I want to make sure, I want to hold the city of Lake Forest Park to that same standard with 390 trees that you propose cutting down. I wonder if this could just all not be solved by the city of Lake Forest Park refusing to give permits to cut down the trees. Just to close, I have followed another community battle with Sound Transit, and that's in Bothell, where Sound Transit wanted to destroy the historical landmark Yakima Fruit Market. And due to community outcry, Sound Transit listened and they changed the plans to destroy that market. So I do have some confidence and hope that because you listened to the community there and made a change, that you can do it here for Lake Forest Park too.
I'm sorry, I apologize, but thank you for your statement. Was there a question we can respond to?
Permits from 390 trees to cut them down.
That is part of the process of going through all of these projects across the region, that we are required to go through the permitting process, and we will do so.
Permits, then will you change your plan?
The reason why we're here today, and again, I want to be honest and open and have these conversations, is that we want to make sure that what we're doing is for the benefit of all, and that there will be change. I hear that. And thank you. I'm trying to speak up. And again, it's hot in here, so I know it's hotter. It's a lot easier to kind of for our passions to rise, and just asking everyone to be patient with us as we try to answer the best we can. So there are options that we will continue to work through to help these projects get through, to meet the needs of the region, the needs of the community as best we can. And I would prefer that we not go into a conversation right now that results in us landing at how are we going to fight each other. I still am hopeful that we can continue the conversation about how to work together. And I would prefer to keep the dialogue there, please.
Before the next question, real quick, I see some sort of natural cues forming. Understood. See you there. Want to acknowledge that you're standing there. We had originally said that we're going to be moving back and forth, so I just want to make sure that everyone who does want to speak is okay queuing up. So, sure, okay, understood. So we'll go here, and then I think if you do want to speak, if you wouldn't mind getting in the queue so that we can go that direction.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I also wanted to acknowledge that my husband has been a bus rider with Town Transit with the bus community for 15 years. Every day his job is downtown. So our family relies on mass transit for an person to get to work. When I talked to him about his opinion as a rider, what he thinks is significant versus insignificant, he has made the comment that the commute between 145th and Lake Forest Park is insignificant. Where he is most impacted now is now the change where he has to take a bus to a transfer station. It's adding 10 minutes onto his commute. He has to walk a distance. They're not ADA accessible. So a lot of planning could be put towards those transitions. I have a question about a SEPA issue. And I wanted to know, in all of the studies that you did, was there any kind of a heat mapping study done for that area?
Thank you for your question. That heat map in terms of... Can you elaborate a little bit, please, on heat map?
King County and City of Seattle just recently finished a heat mapping survey where they went through and drove cars through different areas of the city measuring temperature. Have you done any kind of a heat mapping survey for that corridor?
We have not.
And I just also would like to comment that even though your plan is to move multiple people through those bus lanes, you're going to have multiple people still in those cars, sitting in traffic and sitting in the heat. So just, that's something you might want to consider with this plan, is maybe doing a heat study.
Understood. What I will say is that yes, we will have impacts to the tree canopy. We are working with the city to determine the best way to mitigate that. And that is an ongoing conversation, but our intent is to replace what we damaged. We obviously won't be able to plant 100-foot tall trees, but the intent is to mitigate that and over time end up with a better outcome.
So I want to pause for just a second. We have a lot of people queued up to talk. We're supposed to, and please wait until I finish talking, we're supposed to end at 7:30. We are closing in on that. I've asked the team, can we please stay until 8 o'clock? It's not our facility, but we have been told that we can stay. So I just want to let you know that we are going to try and stay as long as we can. At this point, it's 8 p.m. that we can stay to. It's hot in here. If you can please keep your comments as short as possible, or your questions. Again, we'll try and keep our answers as short as possible so we can hear from as many of you as possible during this extended time.
Thanks, Julie. Charlie, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sally Yamasaki, and I'm a resident of Lake Forest Park since 1960. This is the hottest temperature we have had on Earth to date. And to this date, it's only going to get hotter. So this is the coolest time on our Earth that we have. You talk about looking forward, thinking. How is, when you're thinking of something that's going to last for 100 years, or talking about taking off 10 more minutes here or there, how does that impact the fact that we are having a climate change, a climate crisis here? And maybe there's a way to look at this with our community, with queue jumps, preserving trees, and helping to save our Earth. I also feel like so many others who have been here tonight, like you're here just rubber stamping this. Can there be a possibility that just tonight you come to an answer that says, yes, let's pause and work with their city council?
So regarding the sustainability question, again, this goes back to the question of what is the purpose of what we're trying to do and how does it impact the environment? if you agree, and again, not everyone here is going to, not everyone across the country agrees, if you agree that increased accessibility to reliable, convenient transit creates more opportunities for people to leave their cars and use mass transit, especially all electric mass transit, the impact on the environment is greater when we can help people choose to not use their personal car. When we can create opportunities where they can use electric, green electric facilities to get around the region. And the only way you can really reliably do that is if you have a reliable system that's consistent, that comes when you expect it to, that gets it to where you need to go. It won't compete with the car, but it gives an option. And the more people we can get to move out of their single occupancy car for even some of their trips into transit has a significant impact on emissions and warming locally, and we can do it further across the globe. Now, thank you. So that is the reason why we do transit. It's to connect more people to more places, more equitably, more sustainably. And it is a challenge when we have to make a trade-off between building that transit and cutting down trees. And when we're looking over the course of 50 years and 100 years, we're going to do everything we can to plant trees and more restoration of the environment to balance that out, the short-term losses for the long-term gain of reduced emissions in the transportation network.
Before we move on to the next question, real quick, sorry to interrupt. We're at about 7:30. If you had planned to leave, need to leave, didn't get your question or comment registered, we do have a table over on this side of the room with comment form, question form. So you can do that. If you need to leave, take one with you. Sorry to interrupt.
Truth and accuracy. I like the sound of that. Truth and accuracy. My name is Tyson Greer. I'm a longtime resident of Lake Forest Park, and I'm really pissed off. I appreciate the efforts of your arborists to reduce the number of trees that you plan to take down to Bernard said 390. That's true, but it's not accurate because our regulations require that you count and replace the trees that are over 6 inches. So you haven't counted the trees that are 5 inches and 3/4, 5 inches and a half, 5 inches and a quarter. I'm not going to go all the way down, but you get my drift. So are we really losing 700 trees, 800 trees, 900 trees? This is not an option. 1,000 trees? How many trees will we really lose for 2 minutes?
I do not have. I understand what you're saying. There are regulations that do look at a minimum diameter of a tree at chest height. That's been our method of. I don't have an answer for you for ones that are smaller. So. Yeah, we've got somebody here that can answer your question better than I.
Hey there, Lawrence French with the project team here to represent Project Arborist on the team, and thank you for acknowledging the hard work. We've been working very, very closely with the civil team, the roadway, and we spent numerous hours, dedicated workshops, stepping through the corridor, looking at every possible tree that we can protect within the work zone, and ensuring that we are holding the contractor to the very strictest protection BMPs, so that the trees that can be maximized to the greatest extent feasible. I will say that we do have that 390 trees. They do include non-significant or non-regulated trees. Our arborist teams in the field measured from 4-inch DBH and larger. And so we have, although you're right that the Lake Forest Park definition of a regulated tree is 6 inches and greater, of the 390 approximately, we have 33 of those that are non-regulated, and the rest of them are over 6 inches. But that number is comprehensive of all trees being removed 4 inches and greater.
Small trees that would grow up in the cedar 75 and 100-year time frame won't. Okay.
Summer Riddle, council member, I have a question about the noise. And I understand that your studies have shown that it's not increasing the noise, but I think the history that I want to share with you is when 520 was tolled, all those multi-axle vehicles did not want to pay those tolls, and they came through our community. And so the impact that you're not making is an impact that's been here for a very long time, and it's been an impact on this community that we haven't been able to mitigate because there was no reason to rebuild 522, and Washtenaw wasn't going to rebuild it. But there's an opportunity here for us to get back to a quieter state where we were before 520 was told. So I really want to encourage that understanding that yes, you're not making it worse, it is worse. And we've been worse for years. And so I think that's just something that we have an opportunity here to capture some benefit. And we'd love to work with you on that. Additionally, we want you guys to work with us with Washtenaw to try to lower the speed limit, with the hope that we can narrow some of our lanes and actually reduce that impact on how far you have to dig into that hillside. I think we have an opportunity to gain 3 to 4 feet along the corridor. Sure, those lanes will be narrower, but that will just reinforce that they have to go slower. So right now they're exceeding the speed limit because we have beautiful wide space for them to do so. Design a road that gives them the clues that this is a 35-mile-an-hour road. It's what the rest of the corridor is. I don't think it's going to impact your bus timeline by much because you'll have that BRT, probably have that BRT, right? How can the city, me personally, help you achieve those 2 goals? Better noise situation for us and a smaller footprint with Washtenaw 35-mile-an-hour road.
Thank you. I understand. I almost have to shove this into my mouth. I'm sorry. So I do understand that the traffic volumes have been increasing. I've been in this region about 30 years now, and while I don't live in this area, every once in a while I come up and I understand. It's the speed of those vehicles when the traffic is heavy, when they're stuck in traffic, they're pretty quiet. So it's really, I do understand, and I need to think about that, of how we can think about what opportunities there are when we do get into considering how to reduce noise. It typically is with walls that need to be continuous. So it's very difficult when you're in a single-family neighborhood with access to that road to have an effective mitigation. I'm not going to claim to be a noise expert today, but I want you to know that I'm hearing what you're saying. We do interact with Washtenaw and the city a lot, so let me take that back. With regard to narrowing the lanes, we have approached Washtenaw about that in the past. We have not gotten any traction on that. There are, naturally safety concerns with the width of the lanes and other geometric considerations. I also understand that what you're saying is that the higher design speed, as an engineer would put it, encourages higher speeds. So let me take that back as well, but we have been thinking about that and discussing it with the state, and so far we have not seen any change.
They just recently reduced Kenmore to 35. So they are open to revisiting this corridor, and I hope that gives you some additional traction in your conversations.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is John Goodrich. I've been here for 60 years plus. You're new to the area. You just said you were here for 30 years. And you've been here how long?
About 20 years.
Okay. I'd just like to bring to your attention the worst thing that happened in Seattle in the 60s, and I think you might be able to incorporate it in this project and have a decent outcome for everybody, win-win. They failed to put the monorail because they didn't want to put the monorail down the middle of I-5. They had to cut the middle of Seattle out, take all that land with the domain. Why don't we just do an elevated one lane down the middle of the road when we don't have to take anybody's land and anybody's trees away, and that would take care of everybody's problems and everybody would be happy. Have you ever looked into that?
We have not looked at
That's because you're not familiar with this area. So please do look at that. I'm sure everybody in here realizes that. That was the biggest mistake that Seattle did, is not put the monorail, because we didn't have the money. This time we have money. All you have to do is put just like in Vancouver. Have you been up to Vancouver? Victoria? Have you been to Victoria? You guys have. You have. Have you been to Victoria? Of course. So go up there, put the thing right down the middle of it, everybody's happy, and then we all win. Thank you.
Charlie, this side.
Okay, so I think it's my turn. Really? Nobody's going to phone? Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you all for coming. This is not a fun thing. We are upset. We are hurt. This is a nightmare for us. What I would like to say is that I challenge you to get into our footsteps. You know about making roads. You know all sorts of whatever stones and all that kind of stuff. We don't know anything like that. And you've applied what you know to our city. So come talk with us, deal with us, think out of the box. What else could be done? Don't think along the lines that you've been thinking forever. Think about what else, how else can we do this, rather than saying we are doing it. Thank you.
So I agree with Sally's point in terms of this being the hottest year on earth. And you talk about forward looking. And one of the biggest mistakes mankind has made is putting technology, traffic, transportation, building, taking down forests and putting in concrete and ending up with the hottest planet ever. So I reiterate that concern. I don't know if your decibel levels take into account the loss of trees. I don't know if your SEPA takes into account what the trees will mitigate in terms of CO2 and pollutants. And my last point is with regard to the birds. It's not just the migratory birds. And in fact, Lake Forest Park City website has the link to the Department of Fish and Wildlife that stipulates the standard operating procedures for looking at assessing the bird population and the durable nesting. And durable nesting is for native birds, local birds, as well as migratory birds. So this is a community that cares about the environment. We don't just care about people on their way through our community. We want you to be respectful of our community as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anne Kane. I'm commonly known as A. Kane, which you probably think I like Anne sometimes. But I was just going to say that who is this all for? Because the survey was done a long time ago, and the vote was taken a long time ago, before COVID, before people started working from home, before people changed completely the way they live. So do we need all this extra money spent on something that obviously we don't want at Lake Forest Park, in that we're not against, forward thinking, but we can't look that far ahead because in the last few years things have changed unbelievably because of the pandemic. So I would say, could you please listen to having more queue jumps through Lake Forest Park, leave our trees, leave us with this beautiful place. It's just a little place, but it's so pretty to live there, and we're all so proud of it. And I don't think that many of us are going to be hopping on a commuter bus anytime soon, because it doesn't seem to be like a super young population at the moment, unfortunately. So, you know, I mean, just bear in mind who might use this system, and do we really need, you know, an extra few minutes on buses? Thank you.
My name is Bill Donahue. I'm a resident of the city for 32 years. I am nowhere near the effective 522. However, it is part of my community, and I think most people in this community wish for a successful commute and a successful transit system. But what I don't think you are hearing is that short of producing a legitimate study that compares the cost and benefit of the Q system along 522 in Lake Forest Park compared to your one-size-fits-all BACT program, you are not going to get out of this community alive. I mean that picture to me, okay? Produce the study if you did it before, or pause and do it now. That needs to be on the public record. If it is, and you can show us legitimately that it is a 5 minute longer and your whole concept of a timetable doesn't work, maybe we'll believe you. But we're not, absolutely not going to believe you until we see the study. So take the time to do it right. It is not too late. Yeah. Thank you for being here and putting up with us.
Check. My name is Grace Crowley. I'm a resident of Lake Forest Park. And I was about to echo that comment that if the study exists, and I need a mechanical engineering scientific study of the Q jump in the corridor, we'd like to see it. If it doesn't exist, we'd like to have it produced. That's the #1 priority of many people in this room. The second thing I want to do is echo a comment that was made by a speaker at the last city council meeting. There's a master plan here. The woman before me spoke very eloquently about Lake Forest Park, older residents. There's a plan here to put in a corridor, to build extensive housing. I don't think there's transparency about the master plan. The problem is Lake Forest Park is not like Bothell or Canmore. Those are commercial areas. A corridor running through a commercial area is very different than running through Lake Forest Park. This is residential. So I think there's this idea that there's a continuation of something that doesn't fit our community. And that's the continuation of a commercial corridor. Sure.
Hi, my name's Laura Brandigan. I've only lived here 21 years. I think all of us can acknowledge that one of the things we treasure is our wildlife and our trees. I'm concerned about another part of the study besides the bat lane, and I totally agree with the study on the Q lane and the bat lane. When I've asked in the past about the SEPA analysis and the traffic study, Sound Transit people have told me, we didn't study the traffic through the neighborhoods to get to the garage. We don't have sidewalks, we don't have streetlights. We have wildlife, despite your SEPA study saying that we don't. We have cougars, we have deer. To think that everybody is riding to that garage or those stations through our neighborhood, they already speed through, and you've not bothered to look at that impact on our streets. We had night out against crime last night. The cops were talking to us about the road racing through the neighborhood and how dangerous it is. You're just going to have a whole bunch of commuters to that, and I do not think, I have not seen or been anybody produce for me your traffic study on that. So it's not just along Bothell Way, It's also Ballinger, which is already so backed up you can't turn on it. It's Perkins, it's 178. There are impacts throughout our teen community that you are not studying. Are you planning to do that? You put the garage off. Are you going to do a new SEPA with a traffic study before you build it?
So the SEPA analysis that we did include the garages. They took a look at the traffic impacts that were associated with that. The board
I was told by your staff that they studied the traffic impact along 522, not in the neighborhood.
That is correct. We do not look at every neighborhood street. When your question about the garages, right now the garage in Lake Forest Park that would be located at the town center, that has been deferred by our board of directors until 2044, which is a long way out. I would expect that we will need to revisit our environmental before we go forward with that, because conditions will have changed considerably.
And if you come for a visit, we'll show you that we actually have wildlife.
I believe you. I do.
My name is Charles Ainstead. I've lived here since about 2009. I spent a good part of my life in Chicago. So I have a bit of a different perspective, and people tend to find me a little bit more blunt, perhaps abrasive, maybe even confrontational. But living in Chicago, that's kind of the way things go. So there's a couple of things. One, Julie, I'm really glad you're here. I appreciate you putting the effort in, but I think you know you're being thrown under the bus here. They brought you in from out of state for a good reason. They've already decided to ram this through, but they need a public-facing person to absorb that. So maybe you'll get a little something extra in your Christmas envelope for all this, but you know, you're going under the bus, unfortunately. But secondly, and more importantly, in terms of ethics and accountability, I have a big problem with the board member that's here, Mr. Baker. He apparently also is a council member for the city of Kenmore, and he also rallied a large group of people to come recently to one of our city hall meetings, even wearing design t-shirts to advocate for pushing the transit through. Now, coming from Chicago, if you were on the council there, you'd be in jail pretty much for conflict of interest. I mean, how can this be that somebody who is on the actual board also is working in city government advocating for something? I don't understand how that could possibly be ethical. Maybe Mr. Baker has a comment for us on that.
If I may take a response again, I appreciate my board member being here, and I don't want to put him on the spot, but I can answer a lot of those questions. In that, I have an 18-member board. I have 18 bosses. One of them is the Secretary of Transportation, and the other 17 are all elected officials from around the region. They represent county executives, mayors, city council. They represent their jurisdiction for local issues, and they also represent the region on the transit issues for the board. So I'm not sure that I am clear on the conflict of interest there, where they do have those two jobs, and they do have a responsibility both to the members of the city or the county that they represent, as well as their job being on the Sound Transit Board to advance regional transportation. So that every board member has both of those duties simultaneously.
Can I clarify? So, and the reason this does smell fishy to me is that here in Lake Forest Park, we have a wonderful council member, Mr. Lebo. He also works for Sound Transit, and in every meeting, in every discussion, in every public-facing event, he recuses himself. Does not vote, does not speak. He understands that there's a conflict there, and he does not participate.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate John's civic duty in representing you and doing it in a very fair way. When I came to speak at City Council, he did come, he listened, he was there to represent you and to hear the comments. At the same time, he is an employee of Sound Transit, and so therefore he does have a direct conflict of interest because we pay his paycheck. And I appreciate again that he's trying to do his best for the city, serving you, doing that work, and still doing what is required of him to advance the East Corridor. He's working on specifically the light rail through Bellevue and I-90, but he has that job there. And I applaud him for being able to balance those very challenging conflicts in his life, and that he's doing the right thing there.
Okay, before we move on to the next, just a quick time check. About 10 of 8 here, 7:50. I see 11 people standing, so if we can keep things narrower, we can get more of you in. We will need to end close to 8. Got a lot of breaking down to do and returning this facility to the school district per our agreement. So with that, let's move on.
My name is Dick Harris. My wife and I have lived here for 43 years. And I'll give you the answer in advance so you'll know what to say. Yes, we will. Anyway, my big issue, and the lady before me is the only one I've heard speak to it, my big issue is pedestrian safety and safety in the community along this corridor. We live on Buffalo Way. The sidewalk will be in front of my home. I see it as a benefit for transit, quite frankly, for pedestrian traffic and what have you. I don't have any idea of the density in Lake City, Seattle area, shoreline, coming down Lake City Way, 145th, into Buffalo Way, throwing a bay like in 50 or 100 years. I do know one thing, that there can be more. There can be more density, guaranteed, no doubt about it. So I want lighting. Well, let me back up just a little bit. Right now, there is no lighting whatsoever on Buffalo Way. If indeed you go forward, you plan the way it is, it will be the only sidewalk in Lake Forest Park without some sort of lighting. I think that's irresponsible. I think that needs fixed. And that's what I've been telling him all the time. So, anyway, please help us. Simple thing, do good for the neighborhood, for transit ridership, and whatever. Very simple. Yes, I will. Good. Okay.
We're sorry out about that. We are working with the city to ensure that the lighting is adequate. We will have lighting at our stations. We want to be sensitive about the homes that are. We don't want to flood the houses with light either. So we want to get it right. But I do understand what you're asking for, and that is what we're trying to do in our design is get adequate lighting along the sidewalk.
Okay. My name is Mary Ann Nichols. I live on Bothell Way. I've got a front row seat to what's happening and what's going to happen. I live on 161st. I've got an electronic gate that goes up and back, letting out. I don't know how there's going to be a sidewalk there. I can still get my car out of the driveway. The other thing is, being in front row seat, I see how many people are in the buses when you go by, 3 or 4 at most. Every time I look, there's nobody in the buses. So please explain.
So there are, and this is a long answer, and I don't want to make the long answer because I want people to have a chance to have questions. But there are a lot of questions that, especially after COVID, do we need transit anymore? Are people riding it? And what I can tell you is they are riding it. Not every bus has people on it every day in every direction. This is just the law of the way people move through the transit system. Sometimes you'll have a bus filled going in one direction for that commute, and coming back will be empty as it goes back to pick up more people. Sometimes it'll be full in the morning. Sometimes it'll be full in the middle of the day. Sometimes it's just partially full. And that's still an economically viable and environmentally sustainable route to have a partially full bus. The bus doesn't have to be 100% packed to be a good use of public resources and to be sustainable. What we are seeing in the industry post-COVID is that people are slowly starting to return to work. People are starting to return to developing, buying new homes, building new homes. We're seeing those trends return already. We expect that they will continue. And again, not every bus, not every train will be filled every time it goes on the street. However, there is an increasing use, it is a sustainable resource, and we will continue to move forward on the idea that if we can create good transit systems that have that reliability and that frequency so that it's easy to use, it will encourage more people to consider multiple ways to use the transportation network. The more people that use multiple ways of the transportation network, the fewer emissions we will have in the environment.
Hi, my name is Steve Belland. I've lived in Lake Forest Park for 35 years. I'm a retired aerospace engineer, and I can appreciate the difficulty dealing with schedule pressure, trying to stay on task, and dealing with a lot of variables all in the air all at once. But it seems your main performance measure that you're considering is the transit time through the corridor. And the default is to use the bat lane, and this was just really a good reason not to. And you talked about the apartment buildings, for instance, on 145th. Now, what you're seeing in Lake Forest Park might not be quite as tangible as an apartment building right up against the sidewalk. There's still a lot of concerns and a lot of issues here that you could see really need to be considered and help people see either the incremental benefit of doing this at this cost that has been expressed here, or else change the plan and look at the bypass queues. And so the gentleman from CORE asked about the study, and a few people just ahead of me have, and please do a study, show us why it's so much better to do it that way and take on this huge local community impact. And then maybe you can get, some buy-in on that. And it also seems the discussion is about all or nothing, bat lane versus the queues. Maybe could you see in your study, in your modeling, if you can do just a short amount of bat lane, which amounts to a long queue, something instead of all or nothing bat lane. Please help us see the value in it.
I agree that a lot of the conversation revolves around 2 minutes. And it does, when you put it in that metric, 2 minutes does not seem like, why are we putting all that money in 2 minutes? And so this, again, I'm about to get into my transit head here. When I keep using those words of a reliable, frequent network of transportation and how people will use transit. When you're using a transit system and it comes once every half an hour, or when you're using a bus and it gets stuck in traffic, or you're in the queue jump and you can't get back into traffic safely because it's so congested. What happens in the corridor is that it's not just about losing the 2 minutes, it's about losing that reliability and that consistency of being able to go through it easily. When you lose that, you start degrading that service, you then lose people from the ridership. And when you lose ridership, they go back to cars, and then when you go back to cars, you increase congestion, you increase noise, you increase emissions. So again, it is about the 2 minutes, but it's about the reliability of the entire network to get people through the system.
I appreciate that, but please do a study and show us. And I know it's about more than just the 2 minutes, it's about the cadence and everything else that goes along with that. But please do the study and show us.
I hear you. Let me get back to my team and see what we can do. That's not a non-answer. I promise you it's not. I'm one of those East Coast people when I say that I absolutely know. Let me get back to my team to get back.
My name is Sarah Jalopy, and I moved here in '99 into my husband's childhood home. So he has roots that date back to '62. We lived in a section of Lake Forest Park that was all woods, literally when he was a kid. Salamanders, tree frogs, garter snakes. And I grew up in the woods literally, and we had a very similar childhood. And now it's all developed. I live in a city, and I acknowledge that something needs to be done, but I'm tremendously overwhelmed. And the thought of driving into the southern gateway to our city and having it be just concrete horrifies me. I have ospreys living behind me. Everything's going to change. But I would like to touch on what has been briefly brought up here is I live on 37th Avenue, which runs parallel to Bothell Way. That's going to become Bothell Way when this all happens. And I live on the portion that is north of 165th, well, south of 165th, which is also going to be Waffle Way. They have cars that park on each side of the street, so it's going to be a one-lane street. They call it the gauntlet. It's tremendously, you know, it's going to be chaotic and extremely dangerous. Where I live, we've got a walkway, but it's not sidewalks. We've got a double-line road that people are always passing on. I'm seeing near misses a lot. A lot of us have to back down our driveways, and if you don't back down, you have to pull down. It's a recipe for disaster. And this is an area that was developed in the 30s with country roads and little country homes. It's not designed to be walked away for 2 years. And this has not been brought up at all. There's going to be, you know, dramatic changes to not just noise and pollution, but just dangerous. We have children that live on that street and ride bicycles and you know, I just, to be honest, it makes me think, should we let this move? That's where I'm at. And this is my husband's childhood home. I don't want to leave it. But I'm overwhelmed. So that's just, I don't know that there's an answer to that because, you know, I'm going to be called a NIMBY, and I'm not. I acknowledge this needs to happen on some level, but please reconsider all the different options because if you did a few lanes, then 2 years, you know, we're not going to be bumped away. It's overwhelming. And there's no traffic calming in the future. There's nothing, I mean, there are, you know, sidewalks planned and stuff. It's not going to happen before this happens. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. We're at 8 o'clock here. We've got about 4 folks on each side. I'd like to close the queues. If you have a question and you're not in line, if you could get it jotted down and get to staff. But let's work through our final comments here before we wrap up. Thank you.
Hi, my name is David Jardine. I'm a longtime resident of Lake Forest Park for 30 years. Rode the bus down to the university frequently, and so I love mass transit. I just came home from the Mariners game today on mass transit. I voted for every measure supporting mass transit. I was delighted when this one passed. I think you do have a mandate, but I don't think that having a mandate means that every portion of the plan is as good as every other portion. And what we're dealing with here is one that the community feels is a particularly bad subject, portion of the plan. My concern, and I'm glad I'm coming up near the end, is in listening to all of this, you seem to have 2 parties talking past each other. You're listening very sympathetically to everything that we've told you about that we think adversely affects this community. There have been very good reasons presented why this is not a good use of money. And what I've consistently heard is that you listen sympathetically and you told us why you have to proceed with the bad lanes. So I have 2 questions for you. One, is there anything that would make you abandon your plan for the bad lanes? And I'm going to repeat that because I'd like an answer to it. Is there anything that would make you abandon your plans for the bad lanes? And the second question is, what would that be? Thank you.
That's a hard question. And I promise to stand up here and be honest with you, and I'm going to continue to do that. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. You're right, we're listening very sympathetically, and in some cases very empathetically. And that's hollow when you're not getting the answer you want to hear. I'm still working with my team. We're still looking to see where we can make mitigations, where we can reduce impacts. I am going to be talking to them when we leave about what can we do to see if there's a study that we haven't done that might shed light to change our course. I don't know. I am committed to continuing the conversation and working with my team and listening, and I wish I had a better answer for you.
I have to say that sounds like a no.
I understand that, and I like I said, I'm going to go back to the East Coast. I'm not talking around it. My son used to say the same thing. When you say maybe, you mean no. I said, no, I don't. If I meant no, I would say no.
Hi, I've lived around Lake Forest Park my whole life, and I've owned a home in Lake Forest Park for the last 22 years. So my life is full of memories and wonderful memories of Lake Forest Park. One quick question first is, was there a wildlife study done for mammals? We have bobcat, we have deer, we have coyotes, we have all sorts of animals, and a long, long wall that separates our woodlands by the lake, our upper slope woodlands. I mean, that would be, seems like we have a lot of animals slaughtered just by having an impassable barrier like that great long wall. Has that been studied?
We have looked at wildlife as part of our studies. I'm looking over at my subject matter experts about the effect of the design on, I think your question is, will they be able to get from one?
It's a known thing in the region because there are bypasses made. There's big consideration for wildlife crossing, and it would be a huge issue here too.
Our design does not have anything akin to what you see up at Snoqualmie Pass. We're obviously in a very built environment. There's a lot of, it's a unique community, but it is a built environment. So that's not the first thing that comes to mind, frankly. But I do understand what you're asking, which is how do we deal with that in the future? I don't have a good answer for you on exactly how that will be dealt with.
It would also include pets and other, domestic animals that would normally cross the road maybe sometimes in low traffic times or something. So.
Well, I will remind you all that the context here is that it is an existing state highway. I have heard the comments this evening about noise. It doesn't make the best neighbor. What our proposal is to add largely an existing public right-of-way where there's some paved areas and others gravel. That would become a landscape strip and a sidewalk, in addition to the bat lane we're proposing to put in. So there are a lot of existing problems or characteristics of the state highway, is what I'm trying to say, that will not change as part of this project. So.
And then one comment, why not try the adaptable, low impact, lower cost, faster route, which would be the bypass, than immediately going to the irreversible high impact, which is what you guys have landed on. You could have a bypass quickly. It's not like a wall that's never coming back out again. If you needed it later, if things change more in the direction you're thinking, then maybe a wall's good in the future, but why not try and see if the other option works?
Well, it's an interesting question of why don't we do a part of the answer now and then see if it works and do another answer of another one later. I have some answers that aren't going to sit well. When you start to fragment the projects, the longer we delay implementing the project, the more expensive it's going to be. We know that with inflation, with construction costs, with labor costs, it won't go down. And we are looking to make investments that are generational and that are long-standing and that are permanent. We will go back. We've already talked about I've made a commitment that I will talk with the team and look at what kind of studies or analysis can we do to help support these conversations. I don't know what the answer is right now.
Further, and so you're doing your best to sell us out. I get that. But I think that there's still time to do something maybe with consultants instead of your own people, to take a look and get this study done that we're talking about. You're already over budget. This is a big project. This is going to cost you a lot of money to get this done the way you want it done. And you know that there could be some options, because you're baked into what you're supposed to do. You're the top gun, and you don't have... Want to interrupt me? Go ahead.
No, I was standing there so I could listen.
I'm just saying that it's to your own benefit to do this. Just put your bias on the table for a moment. Get a consultant to do this study, because I think it would be not as biased if you did it yourself. You're trying to find all the reasons why we're wrong, and we're trying to show you all the reasons why you're right. That's not going to get us what we want to be. And I don't know how it's going to do with you. But it would save you a lot of money if you could get to another idea out of the box that would work for this process. Years ago, in the 70s, the highway department came to us and said, we're going to build 4 lanes on your Ballinger Way. And we said, that's not, that's going to hurt our city. And here's the impacts and here's the reasons. We got nowhere because we were talking to people like you. So all of a sudden, out of the blue, we heard that the University of Washington was doing a study on our road. We went down and took a look at it. It was just exactly what we would be able to live with. We took it down to Olympia. We had a very open-minded CEO there at the time. She looked at that. She said, we haven't seen that before. And guess what? 104 is still 2 lanes. That can be done. You're not out of time. You're out of patience.